Pay attention, what is happening surpasses all expectations. 30 nations, indeed 30, including powers such as Germany, India, Canada, France, and Japan, have jointly decided to suspend their trade relations with the United States. This move has become the largest international economic revolt against Washington in a century. It is not simply a trade conflict but a global economic insurrection directed against Trump. Ships loaded with goods remain stranded at sea. Postal distribution centers are overwhelmed with packages that will never reach their destination. Meanwhile, Trump pounds the podium at his rallies, shouting about sovereignty, America first, and betrayal. However, behind the scenes, even his closest allies are beginning to turn their backs on him. This is the chronicle of how the dollar falters. Factories come to a halt, and the international image of the United States crumbles, not due to a military conflict, but because the world has decided to set a definitive limit. It all began with an explosive decision. In August 2025, Donald Trump reinstated massive tariffs on imports from Europe, Asia, and North America. According to the United States International Trade Commission, the average tariff reached 186%. The highest level since the 1930 Smoot-Hawley Act, which preceded the Great Depression. In particular, Swiss products faced tariffs of up to 39%, while European Union countries suffered a 15% impact in key consumer and industrial sectors. But the measure that triggered the storm was even more devastating: the elimination of the tariff exemption for packages valued under $800. Affecting approximately 1,440,000,000 small shipments annually, according to data from the Customs and Border Protection Office. By suppressing this exemption, 30 international postal services, from Deutsche Post in Germany to India Post and Correos de Mexico, announced they would cease processing shipments to the United States. The reason: unsustainable compliance costs, customs bottlenecks, and an unviable system, according to their own words. For American citizens, this meant a commercial blackout on everyday products, from e-books and clothing to specialty foods. Overnight, items that many didn't even realize were imported disappeared. What seemed like a technical discussion about trade balances turned into a direct attack on family economies. The Tax Foundation in Washington warned that Trump's previous tariffs already cost each American household about $300 annually. Now, with the withdrawal of 30 postal systems, the Peterson Institute estimates that the impact could rise to $1,900 annually per household, yet for a policy supposedly meant to protect the American consumer. But the most concerning issue was not inflation, but the reaction of the rest of the world. In Canada, Prime Minister Mark Carney openly supported a boycott movement against American products, while an Angus Reid survey revealed that 85% of Canadians had already replaced at least one American product. We are witnessing the beginning of the collapse of United States economic dominance. Could this be the bill that Trump did not foresee? What followed was a true cultural and economic earthquake that left millions of Americans stunned. The international boycott against North American products manifested not only in postal shipments, but extended to emblematic symbols of American consumption. In Europe, supermarket chains in Germany replaced entire shelves of Coca-Cola with local options, while renowned stores in France abruptly removed Jack Daniel's whiskey, sending a strong message. The Danish Chamber of Commerce revealed that half of Danish consumers avoided buying American brands. And in Sweden, 70% considered a boycott, with 10% having completely stopped purchasing North American products. The Wall Street Journal confirmed that American liquor sales in Europe fell 18% year-on-year in July, marking the largest drop since 1991. What was initially perceived as a simple economic measure transformed into an unprecedented cultural rejection. Meanwhile, within the United States, the judicial system itself began to question the legality of the actions taken by Trump. In September, the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals determined that the president had exceeded his authority under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act by imposing tariffs on imports worth $300 billion. Although these tariffs remained in effect while the appeal was processed, the Financial Times highlighted that the legal basis was weakened generating great uncertainty in the markets. Investors reacted with alarm. Treasury bond yields rose sharply because foreign buyers withdrew from U.S. debt auctions. Congress, through its budget office, warned that annual interest payments had already reached $1.2 trillion, consuming nearly a third of federal revenues. Without the constant flow of international investors, the cost of financing the debt became much higher. The dollar, historically considered a safe haven, began to lose value. According to an International Monetary Fund monitoring report in September, the dollar's share in global reserves fell below 55%, its lowest level since records began in 1995. In contrast, the Chinese yuan gained ground, boosted by Beijing's decision to peg its currency at 71 per dollar, the strongest rate in nearly a year. China was playing its riskiest card, absolute control of critical supply chains. Reuters confirmed that China dominates over 90% of the global production of rare earth magnets, essential for electric vehicles, smartphones, and defense systems. In July, China's Ministry of Industry and Information Technology imposed new export regulations. Without a state license, shipments of oxides or alloys would not be permitted. The United States Geological Survey confirmed that 70% of U.S. rare earth imports in the 2024 came directly from China. Trump threatened to impose a 200% tariff on Chinese magnets, but the reality was harsh. Without Chinese cooperation, the supply chain would simply collapse. In a desperate reaction, the Pentagon announced a $600 million investment to expand the MP Materials mine in California, along with long-term contracts with suppliers in Canada and Australia. However, a Department of Defense report acknowledged that it would take 5 to 7 years for those mines to reach full capacity. How do you face an immediate crisis with solutions that take so long to materialize? While the United States raced against time, the International Energy Agency projected that global demand for rare earths would triple by 2030, turning U.S. dependence into a true ticking time bomb. The most devastating part was realizing that, far from reducing dependence on China, the tariffs had deepened it. The Financial Times revealed that Chinese exports to the United States even grew in July, as American buyers rushed to purchase goods before the new tariffs took effect. The hardest blow was psychological. The policies designed to protect the United States were accelerating its vulnerability. In the words of a Brookings Institution analyst, it was an unprecedented experiment that could go very wrong. The impact was not limited to strategic minerals or alcoholic beverages in Europe. The wave spread to sectors that directly affected the daily lives of Americans. In Scotland, the historic textile company Jamieson and Smith announced it would stop sending wool to U.S. retailers because tariffs doubled import costs. In Denmark, the company Knitting for Olive suspended shipments to the United States, leaving thousands of enthusiasts without access to specialized products. The Washington Post narrated how small entrepreneurs in the United States, from craft stores to fashion boutiques, face the threat of bankruptcy due to stock shortages. What initially seemed like a large-scale economic strategy ended up becoming a survival crisis for these merchants and artisans, who became invisible victims in the midst of an unprecedented trade war. At the same time, new trade blocs began to form, further undermining Washington's influence on the global stage. Bloomberg reported that in July, China and Brazil completed transactions worth over $10 billion using only yuan, thus bypassing the use of the dollar. Meanwhile, India significantly increased its purchases of Russian oil, paying in rupees and reaching a daily average close to 7 million barrels. The International Monetary Fund confirmed that in the first quarter of 2025, central banks acquired 244 tons of gold, marking the largest quarterly accumulation in history. Each of these moves represented a new blow to the dollar's supremacy. Meanwhile, American consumers experienced the harshest impact of this situation, facing a double pressure that affected their finances. On one hand, tariffs raised the cost of imported products. On the other, the depreciation of the dollar further increased prices. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that in July, inflation from imports added 188 basis points to the overall consumer price index. Wages, however, did not grow at the same pace, resulting in a 2.1% drop in real disposable income year on year. This forced many families to change their consumption habits, buying less new clothing, reducing travel, and even limiting food on their tables. For factories, the situation became unsustainable. Profit margins were shrinking while foreign suppliers demanded higher prices. Retailers, cornered by shortages and customer frustration, multiplied their complaints. This created a vicious circle: unhappy consumers, businesses on the brink of bankruptcy, and a government that stood firm, refusing to back down. On the diplomatic front, the isolation of the United States became more evident. In August, Germany's foreign minister warned that Berlin would implement countermeasures if tariffs remained in place in 2026. Japan filed a formal complaint with the World Trade Organization, accusing Washington of violating agreed limits. Even Mexico, a key partner in North American supply chains, suspended postal shipments as part of the conflict. The isolation was total. 30 countries united in a common front against the United States and the Trump administration. In the streets of Washington, tensions translated into protests in front of the White House. Signs expressed clear demands against tariffs and other taxes. Truckers warned of massive layoffs due to the decline in cargo volumes. The American Farm Federation reported that soybean exports fell by 14% compared to the previous year, a direct consequence of retaliations from China and the European Union. In Iowa, grain silos were half empty, while in Michigan, auto parts suppliers reduced their work shifts. This blow hit the industrial heart of the country, precisely in the sectors Trump had promised to protect. According to analysts at the Brookings Institution, the attempt to impose massive tariffs on 30 countries simultaneously was structurally unsustainable. Executives consulted by the Wall Street Journal warned that supply chains could not be rebuilt quickly, overnight. The emerging scenario showed a picture full of contradictions. A strategy created to ensure economic autonomy ended up generating even more dependence on emergency measures, temporary subsidies, and improvised solutions. In Los Angeles warehouses, thousands of pallets with goods destined for countries like Germany, India, and Mexico gathered dust under cold lights. Each box was concrete proof that alliances can freeze instantly, trade routes can be abruptly reversed, and the world's greatest power can find itself surrounded not by enemies in conflict, but by partners who choose to distance themselves. When it seemed the situation had reached its most critical point, the most distressing question arose: how long would the United States be able to resist isolated from its main allies? What began as a tariff dispute evolved into a global economic blockade. The White House claimed the measures were essential to recover jobs and restore industrial sovereignty, but in practice, unemployment was rising like never before. Companies in Michigan suspended shifts, and farmers in Iowa witnessed the emptying of their production chains due to falling exports, while retail networks across the country faced silent bankruptcies. The tariffs, sold as a protective shield, turned into a boomerang that directly hit American workers. On the international stage, the vacuum left by the United States was quickly filled by other powers. China, which dominates more than 90% of rare earth magnet production, consolidated its position, while Brazil and India diversified their trade exchanges using local currencies, relegating the dollar to second place. Global demand for gold reached unprecedented levels, signaling the abrupt fall of confidence in the American currency. The most humiliating aspect was seeing traditional allies, such as Canada and Japan, joining the boycott. Canada, in addition to strongly promoting the so-called Bay Canadian, recorded a 23% drop in travel to the United States in just 1 month, removing nearly $3 billion Canadian dollars from American tourism revenue. In Europe, the boycott of emblematic products advanced, creating a cultural impact that went beyond the economic scope. Ceasing to consume brands like Coca-Cola or Jack Daniels became a form of political protest. The ruthless question hanging in the air was, what happens when the rest of the world decides to live without the United States? This was exactly the reality unfolding. A calculated silence, a withdrawal of cooperation that did not manifest in military confrontations, but in a strategic indifference perhaps even more devastating. Internally, markets reacted in panic. The dollar lost value in IMF indices, falling below 55% in global reserves, its lowest level in 3 decades. Treasury bonds, once seen as safe investments, appreciated because foreign buyers disappeared. Each debt issuance became more expensive, while the Congressional Budget Office warned that annual interest payments already consumed a third of federal revenue. In this scenario, Trump's rhetoric about making America great again seemed to collide with harsh reality. The price of that greatness was sinking the American middle class, directly impacting every household. A study by the Tax Foundation estimated that tariff costs could add nearly $900 annually to each family's budget, meaning less food on the table, reduced purchasing power, and increased personal debts. And the worst part was that there was no solution in sight. The true contradiction became clear. Policies created to regain economic autonomy ended up trapping the country even more in global instability, dependence on external suppliers, and hasty decisions that seemed more like improvisations than strategies. Trump's experiment was turning into a major failure, a risk that affected not only markets but the very essence of the United States' leadership role in the world. A fundamental question then arises that we cannot ignore. Is it possible for the United States to regain the faith of both the international community and its own people? Or are we witnessing the beginning of the decline of its economic hegemony? What do you think? Are we facing a temporary difficulty or definitive transformation in the balance of world power?